The penthouse was alive with laughter, the clink of champagne glasses, and the buzz of voices exchanging pleasantries under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Outside the towering windows, the city was alive, lights, twinkling like stars, scattered across the urban sprawl. New York City, the place that never sleeps, the place that always demanded more, the place that had swallowed me whole and in return had given me everything except my family. I adjusted my pearl necklace, letting the cold pearls rest against my skin. The feeling was familiar, comfortable. It was a night of celebration after all, a night of new beginnings or so I'd hoped. But as I stood in front of the expansive window of my penthouse, my empire watching the streets below, I couldn't shake the suffocating feeling in my chest. The air was thick with nostalgia, with guilt, with unspoken words I had yet to confront. I had been here before, standing at the edge of a new year, silently wishing for a fresh start. But every time I looked into my reflection, I saw a woman who had spent her entire life building an empire with her own hands, only to have it used as a stepping stone for others. My hands had created something beautiful. My hands had built something strong. But they had also been stretched thin enough to be used. The laughter continued, but it felt like a distant hum now, a noise I could no longer bear. A distraction from the truth I had been avoiding for far too long. Dylan, my son, stood at the center of the room, glass in hand, his charm effortlessly drawing in the crowd. He'd always been the golden child, handsome, successful in his own right, and effortlessly arrogant. But beneath the polished exterior, I saw the truth. He was a parasite. He had learned to live off the kindness of others, never once questioning how his life came to be so comfortable. I could feel the weight of the years 15 to be exact bearing down on me. 15 years of supporting him, his wife Lily and their children without so much as a thank you. 15 years of pouring my time, my money, my love into them, only to be left feeling empty, hollow, a ghost in my own family. And then he raised his glass. To my mother-in-law, Dylan's voice boomed, slicing through the noise of the party like a knife. To the woman who pays the bills, but will never be a real mother. The room fell silent. The words hung in the air, so sharp, so brutal, they nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. I could feel the weight of every eye on me. I could feel their judgment, their pity. Lily was beside him, her eyes gleaming with that same fake smile she had worn for the past 10 years. The smile that had once fooled me into thinking she cared, into thinking she was grateful. But now I knew better. For years I had let myself believe that I was part of something real, that I was giving my family the life they deserved. But as the years dragged on, I realized I wasn't part of the family. I was a means to an end. The money, the resources, the connections, all for them. I was the lifeblood, and they had drained me dry. I sat frozen at the table, my napkin delicately folded in my lap. The glass of champagne in front of me felt like a weight too heavy to lift. It was the only thing in the world I could hold on to, the only thing that kept me anchored to the present moment. But even that was slipping away. I looked around the room at the faces of the people who surrounded me, friends of Dylan and Lily, strangers to me. They all had smiles on their faces, the kind of smiles that only came from knowing a secret one they wouldn't dare say aloud. The truth about me, about them. I was the cash cow, the old woman who had more than enough, and they had made it their job to bleed me dry. But no more. Not tonight. I stood in my chair, scraping against the hardwood floor, the noise sharp and intentional. I wasn't sure if they noticed, but I noticed, every last one of them. My fingers trembled as I reached into my purse, pulling out the golden key. The cool metal felt cold against my skin, a symbol of everything I had given, everything I had built. I placed the key on the table with a soft click. The sound echoed through the silence that had enveloped the room. I felt the eyes of the entire room on me now, but I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I was done. The key was their ticket to freedom. It was the key to their house, the house that I had bought, the house that was still in my name, the house they had never once paid for. The note attached to the key was simple, direct, unapologetic. You have 30 days to vacate. The legal papers will arrive tomorrow. I could feel Dylan's eyes on me. I didn't need to look at him to know the terror that was spreading across his face. I had done it. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. And with that step, everything changed. I'm leaving, I said quietly, my voice steady, unwavering. And then I walked away, the sound of my heels echoing through the marble floors of the penthouse. The air around me felt lighter as I stepped out the door. The cold hit my face as I made my way to the elevator. I didn't look back, not once. I had spent years suffocating under the weight of their expectations. But tonight I took the first breath of freedom. For the first time in years, I felt alive. And as the elevator doors closed behind me, I finally realized I was no longer the woman they wanted me to be. I was Claire Montgomery, and I was reclaiming my life. The next few days felt like a blur. The world continued to spin, but I was no longer a part of it, caught up in their web of financial demands and emotional manipulation. I'd spent so many years thinking that my family loved me, that my sacrifices would somehow be returned in kindness, that they would eventually see the value of all I had done for them. But the truth was, they never cared. Not really. They cared about the house, the money, the lifestyle that I had so generously provided. I was just a tool, an endless ATM that could be tapped whenever they needed it. And the worst part was that I had allowed it to happen. I had allowed myself to be used. It had taken years of subtle comments, manipulation, and guilt trips for me to finally wake up. I was always the one who was supposed to be there, the one they turned to when the bills piled up or when they needed a vacation or a new car. And every time I opened my checkbook, I thought that's what mothers did. That's what grandmothers did. They gave. They sacrificed. It was the price of love, or so I convinced myself. I hadn't realized how deeply I had allowed myself to be manipulated until that New Year's Eve. The words Dylan had spoken, the cruelty wrapped in the disguise of humor, had pierced me like nothing else. To the mother-in-law who pays the bills but will never be a real mother, he'd said, as though he was toasting to my greatest weakness. I'd stayed quiet, kept my face neutral, pretending it didn't affect me. But inside, I was crumbling. It wasn't just that he'd humiliated me in front of guests, in front of strangers who probably saw me as just another wealthy woman to envy. No, it was more than that. It was the realization that for the past 15 years, I had been nothing more than a paycheck to him, to Lily, and even to Ethan. They never once stopped to ask how I was doing or what I needed. It was always about them, always about their next need, their next crisis, their next request. I had become nothing more than a source of funds, a way to sustain their lifestyle. It wasn't just Dylan's words, though. It was everything that had led up to that moment. All those late-night calls from Lily asking for money to cover emergencies that never seemed to end. The credit cards, the car payments, the endless list of things I was expected to pay for without question. It never occurred to me to say no. Every time they asked, I gave. I thought I was being a good mother. I thought I was being a good grandmother. I thought I was giving them the life they deserved. But in the process, I had lost myself. I had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had no boundaries, who had no self-respect, who existed only to serve their needs. The woman who had once built a fashion empire from nothing, who had once been admired for her intelligence, her work ethic, her ability to achieve anything she set her mind to, where had she gone? She had disappeared under the weight of their demands, under the pressure of their expectations. She had become invisible, a shadow in her own life, living only to provide for those who never truly saw her. The day after that toast, I found myself sitting in my favorite chair by the window, staring out at the city below. I had been here before. I had spent so many hours in this chair looking out at the skyline, imagining the life I had once dreamed of. I had worked so hard to build something for myself, to create a legacy, and now all of that felt meaningless. What had I worked for if I couldn't even enjoy it? What had I sacrificed everything for if the people I loved couldn't even appreciate it? It was the first time in a long while that I allowed myself to feel anger. Real, raw, uncontrollable anger. And for the first time, I realized I didn't have to live like this. I didn't have to keep giving until I was empty. I didn't have to let them walk all over me. The thought felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The weight that had held me down for so long was finally lifting. I reached for my phone, the same one that had buzzed with requests and demands from Lily and Dylan just hours before. I had ignored their messages, their phone calls, but now I found myself ready to confront them. I could feel the familiar flutter of anxiety in my chest, but I pushed it aside. I'd spent too many years avoiding this moment, too many years convincing myself that this was the price of family. But no more. I called my lawyer, Greg Stevens. He had been with me for years handling the legal matters that came with running my business and managing my personal affairs. I could feel my voice trembling when I spoke, but I didn't let it stop me. "Greg, I need you to do something for me." I said, my voice calm but firm. "I want you to prepare the eviction papers for the Maple Street property. I want them ready by tomorrow morning. And I also need you to cancel all of the credit cards that I've been paying for Dylan and Lily. All of them." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a quiet sigh. "Are you sure about this, Rosalia?" he asked. His voice was filled with concern, but also with a knowing tone that suggested he had seen this coming. I'm sure I replied, my resolve solidifying. I've been paying their bills for far too long. I've been enabling their irresponsibility, their entitlement. I've been part of this toxic dynamic, and I'm done. "Understood," Greg said, the sound of his typing filling the silence. "I'll get everything in order." As soon as I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the relief of a victory, but the relief of finally letting go, of finally standing up for myself. The next few days were a whirlwind. I spent hours reviewing my finances, checking every account, canceling payments, and making sure that every trace of my financial involvement in their lives was severed. I felt a strange mix of emotions, guilt, fear, and even a sense of liberation. But mostly, I felt a quiet pride. I was taking control of my life again. I wasn't just cutting them off financially, I was cutting them off emotionally too. I had spent so long being there for them, pouring my heart and soul into their lives, and in return, they had taken everything I offered without ever giving anything back. I realized that my love for them had been a kind of self-sacrifice. I had convinced myself that by giving, I was helping, but all I had really been doing was enabling their dependence on me. I had been putting their needs above my own, suppressing my own desires, my own dreams, all in the name of family. And where had it gotten me? Alone. Empty. The hardest part, though, was the silence. Dylan and Lily didn't call. They didn't reach out. They just let the eviction papers come. It wasn't until the third day that Dylan finally called. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. And then he called again and again. But I didn't answer. It wasn't that I was cold or uncaring. I loved my son. I loved my daughter-in-law, but I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for them. I couldn't keep allowing them to treat me like an ATM. And I knew deep down that if I didn't set boundaries now, they would never change. They would never learn. The silence stretched on for days. And with each passing hour, I felt a little freer, a little more myself. The weight of their expectations, their manipulations, their endless demands was no longer hanging over me. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. For the first time in years, I could finally start living for myself again. I had spent so long giving, so long trying to make everyone else happy, that I had forgotten what it meant to be happy myself. But that was about to change. I was going to reclaim my life, and this time no one was going to stop me. The morning the eviction papers arrived was cold. I woke up early just before dawn, a habit I had formed years ago, when the demands of the business would drag me out of bed before the sun had even thought about rising. It was always the same, the heavy weight of expectations, the constant pressure of keeping everything together. But today there was no weight, no pressure, just a strange sense of calm as I walked to the kitchen to make my coffee, the rich aroma filling the space, comforting me like an old friend. I hadn't realized until this moment how much I had come to rely on the chaos. The endless demands, the never-ending phone calls from Dylan, from Lily, the false urgency of their needs, it had all become the rhythm of my life. And without it, I felt an unfamiliar stillness, like the calm after a storm where everything was silent and suspended, waiting for the next wave to hit. But there was no wave, no call, nothing. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen, scrolling through emails that had piled up while I focused on the monumental task of severing my financial ties to my family. The reality of what I had done still hadn't quite hit me. I had spent 15 years tied to them through money. The house they lived in, the cars they drove, the schools my grandchildren attended, all of it had been paid for by me. Every bill, every whim, every emergency that popped up. They had become so accustomed to it that I could barely remember a time when they hadn't expected me to foot the bill. The hardest part, though, was facing what I had done for them without ever receiving a shred of gratitude. I didn't need thanks, but respect. A little respect for everything I had sacrificed for them, for everything I had given up in order to give them the life they had. Was that too much to ask for? I had put aside my own needs, my own desires, my own happiness for them. And in return, they had never seen me. Not really. Not as a mother. Not as a woman with her own life, her own dreams. I pulled myself out of the spiral of thoughts. I wasn't going to waste my time on that anymore. I had made my decision, and now it was time to face the consequences. I had known this moment would come. I had known they would be angry. I had known they would be desperate. But what I didn't anticipate was how deep the resentment would cut. The silence between us now was suffocating, but it was also necessary. It was the only way they would learn. I finished my coffee and turned my attention back to the eviction papers that sat neatly folded on the dining table. I had signed them the night before without hesitation and sent them off to the courier to be delivered. But this morning, they felt different. Heavier somehow, like a final severing of the ties that had bound me to them. I was no longer the savior they had made me out to be. I was no longer the one who came running whenever there was a need. I was not their safety net. I was not their bank account. I was their mother, and I deserved more than to be treated as an afterthought. The reality of the decision was beginning to settle in. I had made this choice for myself, for my peace. But the pain of cutting them off, even if it was the right thing to do, still lingered like a dull ache in my chest. I wasn't heartless. I didn't want to hurt them, but they had to learn. They had to understand that life didn't work this way, that you didn't get to take from someone without giving anything back. The phone rang. It was Dylan. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. My heart was already pounding, but I forced my voice to remain calm. Mom Dylan's voice was frantic, full of panic. "What did you do?" "The papers came this morning." "What the hell is this? You can't just throw us out like this. This is our home." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Dylan," I said slowly, "you've had plenty of time. You've had 15 years. 15 years of me supporting you, of me paying your bills, of me being your safety net. I've done everything for you, and not once have you shown me the respect I deserve. This isn't just about the house. This is about you and Lily taking advantage of me for far too long." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Dylan's heavy breathing, his frustration building with each second that passed. "You don't understand," he finally said, his voice breaking. "You don't get it. We don't have anywhere to go. We can't just figure this out on our own. Mom, please, we need you." I felt the twinge of guilt twist in my stomach, but I pushed it away. I wasn't going to back down. "Dylan, I've been there for you. I've been there for you when you needed money, when you needed a house, when you needed a car, when you needed anything. But that's over. I'm not going to keep enabling you. You and Lily need to stand on your own 2 feet, but we can't," Dylan pleaded. "Lily can't work, and then figure it out." I interrupted, my voice firm. "You're both capable of working. You both have skills. You've been given everything you could ever need, and it hasn't been enough. It's time for you to take responsibility. I'm not here to bail you out anymore. You have 30 days. That's it." There was a long silence, and for a moment, I thought Dylan was going to say something else, but all he did was sigh, a deep, painful sound that carried years of frustration in it. "Fine," he said, finally almost defeated. "I get it. But this isn't over, Mom. You can't just walk away from us." "I'm not walking away from you," I replied quietly. "I'm walking away from the life I've been living for you, and now it's time for you to live your life for yourselves." The call ended, and I sat there for a long time staring at the phone. I wasn't sure what to feel. I didn't want to feel guilty. I knew what I had done was right. They couldn't keep using me. They couldn't keep taking from me without ever giving anything back. But still, a part of me couldn't help but mourn what we had lost. Not just the material things, the house, the car, the money, but the bond we had once shared, the family we had once been. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the peaceful way I had hoped. Dylan and Lily didn't call again, and the silence between us deepened. But what surprised me most was how little I missed the noise. I had spent so many years drowning in their demands, trying to keep up with their needs, that I had forgotten what it was like to have peace, to have space to breathe, to have time for myself. And then, one day, a message came. It was from Lily. "Rosalia, I know we've had our differences, but I need to apologize. I've been selfish, and I've taken you for granted. I've relied on you for everything, and I've never shown you the respect you deserve. I'm sorry." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. After everything, after all the years of manipulation, of using me as their financial crutch, she was finally admitting what I had known all along. She was sorry. But was it enough? Could I forgive her? Could I forgive Dylan? I didn't know. But I couldn't make that decision today. Today I was going to focus on me. I looked at my phone and deleted the message without responding. It wasn't out of anger, it was just, I needed time. I needed space. And I needed to remember who I was before all of this, before my children became so consumed with their own needs that they forgot about me entirely. I sat back in my chair, my fingers running over the smooth surface of the table. For the first time in years, I felt free. The weight was gone, and with it, the chains that had bound me to a life I hadn't chosen. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be more battles, more hard conversations. But for now, I had peace. And that was all that mattered. The days that followed Dylan's call were a mixture of relief and guilt, but mostly they were filled with silence. The kind of silence that echoed louder than any argument or confrontation could. I spent the first week in a strange, almost suspended state, going through the motions of my daily routine, but everything felt different. My home, once filled with the noise of family, with the clutter of grandchildren's toys, and the occasional chaos of family gatherings, now felt like a sanctuary. A place where I could finally hear my own thoughts, without the constant barrage of requests, demands, and guilt-laden phone calls. But there were moments fleeting yet powerful when the silence weighed heavy on me. Moments when I would find myself sitting at the kitchen table sipping my coffee and feeling a strange absence in the space around me. It wasn't just the physical space they had occupied. It was their absence in my life, their absence in my heart. I had spent so long focusing on their needs, their desires, their expectations, that I had lost sight of my own needs, my own desires, and most importantly, my own identity. And yet, despite the pang of loneliness that occasionally crept in, I felt an undeniable sense of peace, a clarity that I hadn't experienced in years. The decision I had made was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most liberating. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for someone else. I wasn't trying to prove my worth through endless acts of generosity. I wasn't allowing myself to be manipulated or guilted into submission. I was simply existing. And for once, that was enough. But I wasn't naive. I knew that this peace, this freedom, was fragile. It was only temporary. And soon the reality of what I had done would catch up with me. I had severed the ties that had bound me to my children, but now I had to confront the truth of what that meant. There was no turning back. I couldn't simply return to the way things were before. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine, that the years of resentment, manipulation, and emotional abuse had never happened. I had to face the fact that I had not only changed the dynamic of our family, but I had also changed myself in ways I wasn't fully prepared for. One evening, as I sat alone in my favorite armchair by the window, I found myself reflecting on the past. It was a quiet evening, the soft glow of the city lights twinkling outside, casting long shadows across the room. The gentle hum of the air conditioning was the only sound that filled the space, a sound that had once seemed so ordinary but now felt oddly soothing. I let my mind wander back to the early days of my marriage with Robert, back to when life was simpler, when my focus was on building a future, not constantly managing the demands of an entitled family. Robert had been my rock. He had been the steady presence in my life when everything else seemed uncertain. Together we had built our business from the ground up. It hadn't been easy, nothing had ever come easy for us, but we had done it. And through all the hardships, through all the long hours, Robert had always been there. He had believed in me and us in our dream. He had never asked for anything more than my love, my companionship, and my support. We had been partners in every sense of the word. But when he died, I felt as though a part of me had died with him. I had been left to pick up the pieces of a life we had built together, and in doing so, I had unknowingly submerged myself in the needs of my children and their families. I had been so focused on providing for them, on ensuring they didn't suffer the same struggles I had faced, that I had neglected myself. I had buried my own ambitions, my own passions, my own desires beneath layers of financial support and emotional labor. I had convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that by giving them everything they wanted, I was showing them love. But now I realized that all I had done was create a cycle of dependence. I had taught them to expect everything without ever teaching them how to earn or appreciate it. But all of that was behind me now. I had made my choice. I had drawn the line. And while I knew there would be challenges ahead, I was ready to face them. I had spent so many years being the strong one, the provider, the fixer, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, to be human. But now, for the first time in years, I was giving myself permission to feel. I was giving myself permission to mourn the loss of the family I had once known, the family I had tried so hard to create. And it was in that mourning that I found my freedom. I spent the following weeks gradually rebuilding my life. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic changes. It was about small moments of reclaiming my own space, of rediscovering the things I had once loved. I started by going back to the art gallery, a place I hadn't visited in years. I'd always loved art, but over time my passion had faded into the background. I hadn't even realized how much I had missed it until I walked into the first exhibit, the colors and shapes pulling me in like a magnet. I spent hours there, walking from one painting to the next, feeling a sense of connection to something larger than myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I felt like I was part of the world again. I also began reconnecting with old friends, people I had distanced myself from over the years. I had allowed myself to become so absorbed in the needs of my family that I had neglected the friendships that had once been so important to me. But now with a little more space and time, I began reaching out. The first phone call was awkward, a little strained. But as we spoke, as we caught up on old times, I realized how much I had missed their presence in my life. The laughter, the shared memories, the sense of camaraderie that had always been a part of who I was. It wasn't all easy. There were still moments when I felt a pang of guilt, a fleeting thought that maybe I had gone too far, that maybe I should have handled things differently. But those moments were becoming fewer and fewer. As I continued to focus on myself, on my own healing and growth, the guilt started to dissipate. I knew that what I had done was necessary, even if it had been painful. And as the weeks turned into months, I began to see the fruits of my decision. I was regaining my confidence, my sense of purpose. I was becoming the woman I had once been, and even more than that, I was becoming the woman I had always wanted to be. The phone call from Dylan came one afternoon about a month after the eviction papers were delivered. It was unexpected, and for a moment I hesitated. But I picked up the phone anyway, knowing that this was the conversation I had been avoiding. Mom, Dylan said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I wanted to apologize for everything, for taking you for granted, for not being the son you deserved. I don't know what got into me. I took a deep breath, holding back the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. Dylan, I said quietly, I know you're sorry. But what matters now is what you do with that apology. What matters is how you live moving forward. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. I don't know if I can fix everything, Mom. I don't know how to make it right. But I'm trying. I'm working hard to change. For me, for Lily, for the kids. And in that moment, I realized something that I had never fully understood until now. I couldn't fix him. I couldn't fix any of them, but I could help them help themselves. I had done my part. Now it was their turn. I'm proud of you, Dylan, I said, my voice steady. But this isn't about me anymore. This is about you. It's about you taking responsibility for your life and making the changes you need to make. I'll always be here, but you have to do the work. And with that, we ended the conversation. I didn't feel the weight of guilt that I thought I would. I didn't feel the need to save him anymore. I had given him the tools to find his own way, and now it was up to him to use them. As I sat back in my chair, I felt something shift inside me. A deep sense of peace mixed with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had made the right choice. The road ahead would still be difficult, but I had learned one of life's most important lessons, that in order to love others, you first have to love yourself. And that love, that respect, couldn't be bought. It had to be earned through actions, not just words. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally starting to understand what true love really meant. It wasn't about sacrificing yourself for the sake of others. It was about giving, yes, but also knowing when to take a step back, knowing when to let go. And so, as the sun set outside my window, casting a golden glow across the city, I allowed myself to smile, because I knew that for the first time in years, I was exactly where I needed to be. The days following that phone call with Dylan were strange, almost dreamlike in their stillness. The city outside my window continued to bustle the world outside my apartment, moving in fast forward while I remained caught in the quiet aftershock of everything that had transpired. My life had changed so dramatically in such a short period of time that at times I still had trouble believing it. I had spent so many years catering to the needs of my family, hiding behind the illusion that my sacrifices were acts of love. But now the truth had settled in like a stone at the bottom of my stomach. Love couldn't be bought. I couldn't keep giving pieces of myself away in the hope that they would somehow understand, somehow appreciate it. There were mornings when I still woke up with a sense of dread, the kind of dread that fills the pit of your stomach when you know something monumental is happening, but you're not sure if you're ready to face it. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I would ever be ready. I had spent so long trapped in a cycle of giving without receiving anything in return that it had become a part of who I was, a part of my identity. Letting go of that, of the role I had been playing for so long, felt almost impossible at times. I had been a provider, a protector, a source of endless support, and I had become so wrapped up in that role that I had forgotten who I was outside of it. But as the days stretched into weeks, I began to realize something important. The stillness wasn't a void. It was space for me to breathe, to think, to reconnect with the woman I had once been, before my family had consumed my every waking moment. It was a quiet rebellion against the version of me that had allowed herself to be taken for granted. I wasn't empty. I wasn't alone. I was free. The first time I truly felt it, the full weight of my decision and the relief that came with it, was when I visited the art gallery again. The paintings, the sculptures, the colors that once stirred my soul but had been relegated to the background of my life for so long, they welcomed me back as if nothing had changed, as if I had never left. I stood there in front of one painting in particular, a piece that I had seen dozens of times but had never truly appreciated. It was a landscape painted in bold strokes of deep blues and vibrant oranges, a scene of sweeping hills beneath a golden sunset. It felt like a reflection of my own life, a landscape once dominated by shadows and doubt, now bathed in the warm glow of new beginnings. As I stood there staring at the painting, something inside me shifted. It was as if the fog that had clouded my vision for so long had finally cleared. I had spent years burying my own dreams, my own desires beneath the weight of family obligations. I had sacrificed so much for the sake of others, convinced that it was the right thing to do. But now for the first time, I was finally allowing myself the space to breathe, to live for myself. And it felt liberating. The idea of taking control of my life, of putting myself first, wasn't easy. I had spent so many years feeling responsible for everyone else's happiness that the thought of focusing on my own felt almost foreign. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the house or the bills or the lifestyle they had grown accustomed to. It was about everything, about the emotional labor, the guilt, the constant sense of obligation that had weighed on me for so long. I thought about Dylan and Lily and the years I had spent pouring everything into them, trying to make them happy. The endless dinners I had prepared, the vacations I had financed, the Christmases and birthdays I had funded, always hoping that someday they would appreciate it. But they never did. At least not in the way I needed them to. They had grown so accustomed to having everything handed to them that they couldn't see the toll it was taking on me. They couldn't see how much it hurt when they treated me like an ATM instead of a mother, instead of a person. They couldn't see how much I had sacrificed, how much of myself I had lost in the process of trying to give them everything they wanted. That was the hardest part, realizing that I had spent so much time trying to make them happy that I had forgotten what it meant to make myself happy. I had sacrificed my own happiness for theirs, and in doing so, I had become someone I didn't recognize. I had become someone who was willing to give everything, money, time, energy, without ever asking for anything in return. And that's when I realized how unfair it had all been. Not just to me, but to them. Because by giving them everything without teaching them how to give, how to work for what they wanted, I had set them up for failure. I had taught them that life was about taking, not giving. that love was something to be earned through material possessions, not through respect, not through effort. But as much as that realization hurt, it was also a wake-up call, a call to stop being complicit in their behavior, to stop allowing them to use me as their emotional and financial crutch. They needed to stand on their own 2 feet. They needed to learn how to work for what they wanted, just as I had done. They needed to understand that love wasn't something you could buy. It wasn't something you could take for granted. It had to be earned. And so I made the decision to let go, to stop enabling them, to stop sacrificing myself for them. I had done enough. I had given enough. Now it was their turn. Over the next few months, I continued to rebuild my life. Slowly but surely, I began to reclaim the parts of myself that I had lost. I started writing again, something I hadn't done in years. It wasn't anything grand or meaningful, just small reflections, observations about life, about the world around me. But it was a start. It was something that reminded me that I still had a voice, that I still had a story to tell. I also began to travel more, something Robert and I had always talked about doing, but had never quite gotten around to. I took a trip to Paris, something I had always dreamed of, but had put off for so long. And when I returned, I felt a sense of accomplishment, a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't felt in years. I also started spending more time with my friends, those who had been there for me when I needed them the most. I reconnected with old colleagues, people who had been a part of my life before the chaos of family obligations had taken over. They were there for me when I needed support, when I needed someone to remind me of who I was outside of my role as a mother or a grandmother. They reminded me that I was more than just a provider, that I was a woman with dreams, with passions, with desires. And then there was the conversation with Ethan. After months of silence, he finally reached out. His voice was hesitant at first, unsure of how to begin. But as we talked, something shifted between us. He was no longer the entitled son who had taken me for granted. He was a man, a father, and he finally understood the weight of what I had done for him. "I don't know what to say, Mom," he admitted, his voice full of emotion. "I've been an idiot. I've taken you for granted for so long. I didn't realize how much you were sacrificing. I didn't realize how much it was costing you, but I get it now, and I'm sorry." And for the first time, I felt that small flicker of hope. Hope that maybe they could change. Hope that maybe this tough love, this boundary I had set, was the catalyst they needed to grow up, to finally understand the value of hard work, to finally understand what it meant to earn love, not buy it. The conversation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years of emotional manipulation or the resentment that still lingered between us. But it was a start. A sign that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for our family after all. As I sat in my favorite cafe, sipping my coffee and reflecting on everything that had transpired, I couldn't help but smile. Not because everything was perfect. Not because my family had suddenly become what I had always wanted them to be, but because I had found something far more valuable than all the material things I had given them. I had found my dignity, and with that dignity came the freedom to live my life on my own terms, to live for myself, and to love myself in a way I had never allowed myself to before. And that, in the end, was the most important lesson of all. As I reflect on everything I've shared, one thing becomes crystal clear. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself. It's easy to get lost in the roles we play for others, mother, daughter, friend, provider, forgetting that our own needs, desires, and happiness are just as important. For years, I sacrificed my well-being for my family, convinced that love meant giving everything without question. But real love, true respect, starts with setting boundaries and knowing when to prioritize your own health and peace of mind. If you're reading this and find yourself constantly giving, always putting others first, remember you can't pour from an empty cup. You deserve to live a life where you're not just fulfilling everyone else's needs, but also nurturing your own dreams and aspirations. I know it's not easy, and I know the guilt can be overwhelming. But trust me, when I say that you are worthy of love, respect, and kindness, starting with you. Don't be afraid to say no, to walk away from toxic situations, and to create the space you need to thrive. You've done enough, and now it's time to focus on you. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, I'd love to hear from you. How have you reclaimed your own happiness, and what boundaries have you set to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to learn from your experiences and grow together. Thank you so much for reading and sharing this journey with me. Your support means the world, and I'm beyond grateful to have this space to connect with you. If you found something meaningful in this story, feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Let's all embrace the power of self-love and respect one step at a time.